A warm greeting to all of you. Welcome to Rise Up, a channel sharing knowledge for comprehensive self-development through great books. Have you noticed? At some point, many of us started accepting white lies in our communication. When a leader makes a mistake and you carefully bring it up, instead of thanks, you receive criticism. When you give feedback to friends or colleagues, they may react with anger or dissatisfaction just because you spoke harsh truths. You end up regretting telling the truth and start choosing lies that are easier for others to accept. You don't want to hurt others' feelings or strain relationships. You consider this a harmless lie, even thinking it's an effective way to communicate. But lying is still lying. It merely allows us to avoid problems without ever solving them. Because we use lies as a shield, many of us don't dare to face the truth, leading to suffering, conflicts, and low communication effectiveness in work and relationships. Take, for example, the downfall of the Nokia empire. A study from INSEAD Business School in Europe shows that Nokia's decline was due to its leaders' excessive focus on building their own legacies. This behavior permeated the company culture, leading subordinates to simply applaud without question. From leadership down to employees, no one dared to face reality. Consequently, they failed to recognize and address existing limitations, which ultimately led to the company's collapse. In all aspects of life, from family relationships between parents, children, spouses, to businesses, governments, and nations, people often shy away from facing the truth. Communicating with people who can't handle the truth often leads to arguments, frustrations, and mutual attacks. So how can we tell the truth in a way that's palatable, sharing harsh truths in a way that others can still happily accept, support, and act on, achieving mutual benefits? How can we communicate effectively, especially in difficult conversations? Today's book, shared by Rise Up, provides a method for truth-based communication, helping you overcome the fear of honesty, break down communication barriers in work and life, and improve your relationships. The book is called Truth at Work by Mark S. Albion, a highly regarded communication guide. Albion is among the world's top 30 experts on leadership and the founder of Leadership IQ, often described as an authority on employee engagement. As a leadership skills trainer, many examples in his book apply well to companies, businesses, interactions between bosses and employees, or among colleagues. However, I believe it can be applied to family situations too, so that parents don't turn discussions of truth with their children into criticisms or blame, or in classroom settings, especially for students working in groups. Let's start today's content by first understanding what prevents us from facing the truth. There are 4 things that kill the truth. The first is ignorance paired with overconfidence. There's a saying, if someone is free of biases, no matter how foolish they are, they can understand even the hardest problems. But if someone believes they fully understand the problems before them, without any doubts, then even the smartest person cannot grasp the simplest things. This describes the Dunning-Kruger effect, which almost everyone suffers from, an overestimation of our own abilities. The more ignorant a person is, the less they realize it. The more foolish, the less aware of their own foolishness. This ignorance, combined with overconfidence, coupled with personal experience, often leads us to make mistakes. The next factor that obscures truth in communication is differences in perception. There's a story about a king from the Jin dynasty who, upon hearing that people were dying of starvation, asked why they didn't just eat meat porridge. It sounds ridiculous, but it's a common issue. Different circumstances lead to different perceptions of reality. Yet, in conversations, we rarely consider these differences. This disparity in perception makes communication challenging. When you don't see things the same way, you're forced to view them differently. This brings in a third factor that kills truth: psychological resistance. In psychology, there's a term called cognitive dissonance, like when a fox wants a grape but can't reach it, so it convinces itself that the grape is sour and not worth wanting. A mother who's told that she did something wrong to her child may resist this because she views herself as a loving parent. Cognitive dissonance causes her pain, so So to avoid inner conflict, she finds reasons to prove she was right. When lies are told repeatedly, they start to feel like truth. People tend to deceive themselves to avoid cognitive conflict. But the more we deceive ourselves, the more we suffer and face communication difficulties. The last factor obscuring truth is conflict of interest. An example is doctor. Barry Marshall's discovery in 1982 of the bacterium H. pylori as the cause of stomach ulcers. Even when he ingested a broth full of these bacteria and developed symptoms, no one believed him. It took 23 years for him to be awarded the Nobel Prize. Why? Because pharmaceutical companies had already mass-produced ulcer treatments that were ineffective. Recognizing H. pylori as the true cause of ulcers would have meant financial losses, so they tried to obscure the truth. You'll see that most people, when they sense even a slight threat to their interests, will instinctively protect themselves with lies. These 4 factors lead us away from the truth. By understanding them, we can find ways to communicate based on truth effectively. Here are 6 principles for truth-based communication. The first thing is to focus solely on the truth if you want others to accept your perspective. In the book, the author presents the FIRE model. Fact: what happened without emotion. Interpretation: how you perceive the fact. Reaction: your feelings and actions based on the fact and interpretation. Result: the outcome of your actions. Imagine you recently had to work in a group with a friend named Kelly, and she has been arriving 10 minutes late for the past 2 days. Kelly being 10 minutes late is a fact. But here, we need to consider how the human brain works. It's like an interpretation machine. It doesn't necessarily interpret the actual reality of the world, but can create different perceptions of the world for us. Once it registers a fact, the brain uses accumulated experience and knowledge to analyze this perception, then deduces meaning or intention behind the fact. So when you observe the fact that Kelly is 10 minutes late, you may immediately assign meaning to it. If you've had prior conflicts or some dissatisfaction with Kelly, this perception may influence the brain's interpretation of her lateness, making it easier to think negatively. Being 10 minutes late might translate to thinking Kelly is selfish, lazy, or unconcerned about the other team members. Based on this interpretation, you may react with anger, leading to a reluctance to collaborate with Kelly. You may come up with a solution influenced by your bias, perhaps requiring Kelly to text you each time before she heads to a team meeting to prevent lateness. However, these actions will only make Kelly feel resentful and yield no positive results. So, what should you do? The author suggests using the FIRE model. Consider your words and thoughts. What is fact? What is interpretation, reaction, and result? Sort them into corresponding categories, and when you look at them, you'll see what is truly the fact and what deserves your focus. What is a fact? Facts need to be specific, fair, objective, devoid of emotional color, and timely. Timeliness here means not bringing up past issues or letting old opinions about that person cloud your current thinking. The FIRE model serves as a filter, separating the fact, F, from the other 3 elements, reminding us to focus on the fact from a balanced perspective. This way, conversations won't be influenced by emotions. And if your words focus on the fact, even if the outcome is not as expected, there's nothing to regret. The second tool for expressing truth in a way others can accept is thinking from their perspective. In the book To Kill a Mockingbird, Atticus tells his daughter, "You never really understand a person until you consider things from his point of view." Thinking from someone else's perspective isn't about feeling their emotions or mirroring their sadness. It doesn't mean you have to forgive or overlook boundaries when they do something wrong, nor do you need to force others to think from your point of view. The author says that even if just one side can put themselves in the other person's shoes, the conversation will be effective. Thinking from someone else's perspective is also called empathetic understanding, accurately understanding the other person's feelings or difficulties through empathy. There's an experiment in the book. An addiction counselor asked recovering alcoholics to take a test. After completing it, the counselor told them, "You drink more than 90% of others, so you need to continue your treatment for alcohol addiction." Naturally, the participants didn't accept this. They believed they hadn't drunk that much. At this point, the counselor had two ways to respond. "This test doesn't lie. Don't you know how much you drink? I understand that this result may surprise you. I think this may not be what you expected." Using the second approach, the number of people willing to accept treatment increased significantly. This way of speaking is thinking from the other person's perspective. You see, putting yourself in someone else's shoes means understanding their emotions without assessing if those emotions are right or wrong. You don't have to say, "I support you," or "I oppose you." So, when you reveal the truth to someone, they may feel hurt, and you need to be willing to empathize and use a phrase like, "I can see that this result might surprise you, and I think this may not be what you expected." That way, they can accept it. This is a very important phrase for demonstrating empathy. The real key to putting yourself in someone else's shoes is to overcome the ego-driven impatience within you. In The Godfather, there's a quote, "Don't hate your enemies. Hating them clouds your judgment and leads to mistakes." Thus, empathy in communication is extremely important. Next, before speaking the truth, set an effective goal. If your reason for speaking the truth is only to get an apology, make the other person recognize their mistake or to retaliate and make them feel bad for what they did. These are ineffective goals that most people mistakenly pursue in communication. Pursuing arguments, revenge, or demanding apologies is just a way to vent emotions, not a solution that advances or resolves the issue. So, how do you set an effective goal? An effective communication goal needs to be rational. How do you think rationally? Look further, envisioning the goal between you and the other person in 6 months. Before sharing the truth, answer these 4 questions. In 6 months, if you speak the truth, how would you hope your relationship with the other person develops? Secondly, what changes would you hope to see? What would you hope to do? What would you hope the other person will do? When you analyze rationally, you'll gain a reasonable perspective and use appropriate language in the dialogue. Another issue is that many people easily fall into a confrontational mindset when they need to speak the truth. To communicate without creating confrontation, the author has introduced a 5-step tool with the IDIS model. Invite the person to join the conversation. You might say, "Would you like to talk with me about this issue?" Dismantle. Take down the person's defenses. You could continue by saying, "I don't want to blame you for anything. I just want us to discuss our views on this issue." Identify. This means eliminating blame. The conversation about the truth isn't to make someone feel bad about being wrong. It should focus on solutions rather than blame. So, you might say, "Even though we have different views on this issue, we can still discuss it to find a better approach." Share. Acknowledge the other person's rights, making them feel safe and reinforcing the idea that this talk is for understanding rather than criticism or attack. You could say, "Does that sound okay to you?" Schedule. Offer them a choice to create a safe space, which also helps them engage better in the discussion. When given no choice, people tend to become defensive, so you might ask, "Would you like to talk now or 5 minutes after lunch?" This should be said within 30 seconds to open up dialogue rather than confrontation. If the issue is serious and they still refuse to talk, you can add, "May I ask why you don't want to discuss this with me?" If things go badly, or if they say something that makes you angry, pause for a second. Think about whether there are other remedies you can apply. That 1 second also helps you to bring out empathy within yourself, allowing you to understand that they might just be protecting themselves. This prevents you from reacting out of anger and losing control. Another important tool in this book, which I believe is unique compared to other communication books, is creating visuals with language. For example, when a boss tells an employee, "Your customer service is poor," the statement is vague, unclear, and often leaves the listener feeling upset. What does poor mean exactly? Does it align with the employee's own standards? In conversations, one reason conflicts arise is due to differing definitions and standards for the same issue. The book shares a useful tool called creating visuals with language. Simply put, this means you need to use specific language to describe abstract concepts, helping to create an image in the other person's mind. When giving feedback, you need to rely on 3 standards: poor, good, and excellent. Describe what poor, good, and excellent service looks like, so the employee can understand these standards. Providing all 3 standards is like painting a complete picture in the listener's mind. Your aim is not to expose their weaknesses, but to help them improve for the future. Remember that people often cannot hear harsh truths because they can't handle the cognitive dissonance. So, when they have a full picture of poor, good, and excellent standards, they'll naturally adjust if they're not meeting them yet. The final tool for truth-based communication is structured listening. When you start feeling cognitive dissonance, blaming, anger, or hurt, because you hear the truth about yourself, that's the moment you most need to focus on listening. Listening is a vital part of a structured process for truth-based conversations. This structure involves 3 steps: opening, listening, and affirming. First, use the IDIS method to initiate the conversation to encourage the other person to talk with you. Step 2, once the conversation begins, is to listen effectively. Through practical research, the author has identified certain phrases. Whenever these phrases appear, they indicate either you or the other person is not truly listening. These phrases include, "Stop complaining. Complaining is pointless. Accept reality. Life isn't fair. There's a silver lining in every cloud. Don't worry, you'll get through this." Yes, but listening means simply being silent, focusing your ears and mind on the other person. Many people find this difficult. Another small but significant tip is to ask permission to take notes during the conversation. Taking notes allows you to create a fire model on paper to deduce which part of what the other person says is true. Once you complete this, you'll realize you are genuinely listening and focusing on the truth without blaming or accusing the other person. Additionally, the author stresses softening the issue. Don't turn a 5-minute conversation into a 50-minute one, or speak so much that the other person barely has a chance to respond, with over 60% of the time being your words. These are signs you're being overly strict and aggressive, which won't yield your desired outcome. Finally, the 3rd step in structured listening is to affirm. Confirm the truth after both sides have shared, then work towards a win-win solution. These tools help us learn how to communicate transparently and speak with truth rather than emotion, judgment, or threat. Talking is a natural ability, but how to talk effectively is a skill we must learn. In the past, due to a lack of understanding about communication, we may have hurt others and ourselves, increasing conflicts in our relationships. This book offers practical methods to help us overcome communication barriers, foster harmony, and gain mutual understanding. However, we must remember that there's no one-time fix that lasts forever. Like self-improvement, learning how to communicate is a lifelong lesson. I hope that you and I can both learn and apply these methods in real life to face the truth in conversations without being controlled by our egos or emotions. By doing so, we can speak honestly and turn complex issues into simple ones. Thank you for listening. If you found this video helpful, please share it with those who need it, give me a like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to see my weekly videos.